At the end of each gardening season, I like to walk around my garden and reflect on what I could have done better and the lessons that I've learned.
One thing I love about gardening is that there is always an opportunity to learn and improve, and this summer gardening season definitely taught me a lot. The first lesson is one that I should have acted on this year because this has come up in the past, and that is to not grow as much. I don't have a huge space for gardening, and yet I wanted to try a bunch of different tomato varieties, and in addition to things other than tomatoes, I have plants packed in everywhere. I can pull some pretty good harvests in my small space, but my yields could have likely been better with fewer plants because all of my raised beds just had so many plants in them. And while things like peppers can do better planted closely together, I felt like my tomato plants in particular needed more frequent feedings. My tomatoes still did really well this year, but had I not crammed in so many into each bed, they probably could have done a lot better. Next year, I plan to grow less varieties, especially because my dad gardens too, so I can just stick to varieties that he doesn't grow. The next lesson is that I should have used larger tomato cages on all of my plants or pruned my plants more heavily if they were in a smaller cage or added a support stake to the plants as they grew. I wanted to use what I had though, so some of them were smaller or shorter than others, but some of my tomato plants quickly outgrew the smaller cages. I know a lot of people say that caging tomatoes isn't the best way to support them, and there are lots of other ways to do that, such as the Florida weave or single stemming. But for me, I prefer cages. So I think I really need to stick to these larger cages. Since I plan to grow less next year, I should hopefully have enough of these larger cages, but if not, I'll definitely get some more. The next thing I learned is that I really need to start some of my flower seeds much earlier. In the past, it wasn't a huge issue to start them as late as I did, which was around April and May, but we have been having hotter summers, so some flowers like my cosmos and marigolds just got fried. If I started them sooner, they could have gotten more established and had been stronger to handle a little bit more heat. And the flowers that did manage to survive the heat have just not grown as quickly, so it's taken a while to get some blooms. Going back to tomatoes, I should stick to more cherry-type tomatoes. The larger heirloom or beefsteak slicer varieties of tomatoes just don't produce enough for it to be worth it. I usually get maybe 5 of them before the plants start to die off, so for the amount of resources and effort, they just aren't worth it, especially since they are more prone to splitting and cat-facing. Even though I said I was trying to not grow as much next year, sometimes 1 or 2 plants just isn't enough. This year, I decided to just grow 2 cucumber varieties and just did 1 of each variety. And they struggled this summer, and while they are catching their second wind, it wasn't a great cucumber year for me. Had I planted 2 or 3 more of each variety, I probably would have had enough to eat fresh, as well as to save some for pickles this year. I really wanted to make my own pickles again. Last year, I only had 1 plant of each variety, but it was a better year for them. So next year, I'd rather have excess cucumbers than not enough. I can always give some away. The next lesson is to stick to what grows well in my zone. I love okra, but I just don't have the right climate to grow it well. There's a reason why it's in southern cuisine, because it's hot and humid enough in the south for them to thrive. My zone is pretty warm, but it's just not humid enough. I do want to try okra 1 more year, but I still don't think I'll be very successful. Some things I just can't grow, and I need to accept that and focus on what I can. Next up is I should have buried my oyas deeper. I should have remembered that the soil can settle throughout the season, so the oyas evaporated more quickly. They are supposed to be buried up to their neck, but when I put them in, I should have pretty much buried the entire vessel to account for the soil settling. The last lesson I learned during this summer gardening season is to know when to let go. There are tons of plants that I have in my garden that should have been removed a long time ago. Whether it be due to too much pest pressure, too much disease, or just not doing well, maybe the heat just really did them in, or if they just weren't producing enough. I always have too much faith that my plants will have some spectacular rebound, and while sometimes it does happen, it doesn't happen as much as I always hope it will. If I remove plants sooner, I can stop wasting resources like water, or I can use this space to plant other things. As I mentioned earlier, one of the things about gardening that I love is that there is always an opportunity for learning, and if we don't try things, then we won't know. And sometimes conditions may vary from year to year, so what works one year may not the next, but all we can do is try.